Hello, everybody. Welcome to another live stream. We are live with Marcel and Kilani. And today is going to be a hot topic that so many people are talking about. And I think it's such a relevant topic today as well. And that is on quiet quitting. And so welcome, Kilani. Thank you for joining us on this call as well.
Thank you as well, and welcome to everybody who's joining or going to be joining us.
Absolutely. I'm actually just gonna do a little invite here. Say hi everyone, and to see who responds. There we go.
So I
Yeah. So
think
remember, huh?
you put that
What's
in the
that?
you put that in the private chat, not in the comments.
Oh, wait. Oh,
You got to switch
that's
the tab.
okay. Yeah, I do technology. Old people. All right. So hi everyone. There we go. It's like all right. So I think that yeah, perfect, awesome. So let's talk about quiet quitting because that is such a big topic in these days, and it's so funny because it's so recent too that all of a sudden there was like this term, quiet quitting.
Yeah, I really like the term quiet quitting. If I'm being
Oh
honest,
yeah,
I like
yeah.
I like what it represents because it kind of it doesn't sound like what you would expect it to be, but when you hear the
Mm,
definition of what quiet quitting is, and maybe we should start with that, is it really it kind of like rings something for you. You're like, oh wow, like there's something going on beyond just what we're seeing on the surface.
mm. Yeah, the first time I read it and I heard about it, I'm like, quiet quitting. Is it just people leaving quietly?
That's what I thought too.
Right? And like, haven't people been doing that for decades? Yeah, that was quite interesting. But then when I started reading about it, I was like, what makes that quiet quitting though? That was for me, like, who coined that? Right? Like, who was that first person to come up with quiet quitting? And I'm wondering if that was somebody in a leadership position or if it was somebody actually who was setting boundaries for themselves.
Yeah, I think if we can start maybe by defining what quiet quitting is for anyone who may not have heard the term. I think everyone's probably familiar with that it happens, but the
Mm,
term quiet quitting I feel is still fairly either new or not really associated with that yet. Like we just
mm,
mentioned how we thought it was an entirely different thing than it is. But for anyone who doesn't know, quiet quitting is when people are still employed, they're still working, but they show up to work without much effort. They just do barely what's required, the bare minimum, and just kind of do what they're paid for essentially, but refuse to go above and beyond, refuse to strive for the next level or help each other out. It's just kind of clock in, do the work, clock out, go home,
mm,
without really much extra.
hmm. Yeah. So basically just people who kind of set some boundaries, right? Around how they're working and how they're operating.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
I'm just curious, like, when did that become a bad thing?
I think there's two perspectives on that, and if I can bring in the generational piece too,
Mm-hmm.
that would be a good time because that's something
Yeah.
that comes up a lot for us. But also that I think there's two perspectives on the good or the bad of quiet quitting. And I think people in maybe upper level management or even in older generations um, may see quiet quitting as a not great thing because
Mm.
your generation, right? There's this expectation that you put in everything that you have to your company, your loyalties to your company. You just everything goes in there, right? Which is
Mm-hmm.
great, but at the same time, that can also result in other parts of your life not being as fulfilling or not
Yeah.
feeling as happy.
Comes at a cost.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Whereas
Mm-hmm.
in my generation and millennials as well, um, we have a deeper understanding or view at least that work is a part of our lives. It's not our life entirely,
Mm-hmm.
and to essentially I mentioned earlier, to do what you're paid for, right? It's an exchange between employer and employee. You get paid to do a certain amount of work, so you do that work, you show up. But as far as going, way above and beyond, I think in the younger generations, we're starting to put more emphasis on our family, on our friends, on our well-being, which doesn't allow for us to, be spending all of our energy on work. So I think there's kind of two perspectives there on the good and the bad.
Yeah, and I love that, that you're kind of, starting that conversation from kind of a generational piece, right? Because I think that's what's so important here too, is that, a lot of organizations are run by, generally anyway, by people from my generation. And it's very rarely do you meet a 22-year-old CEO. It happens every now and then, but it's rare. And most of the time, these organizational leaders have grown through the ranks, and they started somewhere kind of at the bottom of the management chain, and have worked themselves up right through the ranks of multiple organizations, and kind of earned their credo, right? It's like they've earned their street credit. They've proven themselves. They've shown that that in order for them to be an effective leader, they've gone through this process of being an effective follower first, right? And I think a lot of what we're seeing in the workplace is a shift in that, right? Is that younger generation people don't necessarily see that, by being a follower, you automatically become a better leader, and it's, because they're taught from day one, very early in school, that, they're supposed to be leaders, right? If you're a parent right now and you're raising your child, how much time are you emphasizing that your child needs to be a follower rather than, needs to grow up to be a leader? So I think most children these days grow up with this mindset of like, hey, but it's my role in this world to take the lead in something, right? And to speak my mind, and to share my perspectives, and to share the wisdom that I have to bring into this world. And so as that generation is then moving into the workspace, you're going to start seeing this disparity, right? Because they bring different values. And one of those values are, if you're paying me the absolute minimum, right, of then you're going to get the absolute minimum, right? You're going to pay me what I'm worth, or otherwise, you're just going to get what you pay for. And I think that's potentially a system that organizations are not set up for, because like you said, for people like us, we, when we started in the workforce, we were all about sacrifice everything, right? It's okay that you're getting paid minimum wage. Prove yourself, right, to your bosses. And when you prove yourself and you go above and beyond, you'll get rewarded by getting a promotion. And, and kids these days, they just, they operate in a different space. They're like, no, why would I do that? Right? You're making a ton of money, right? Off of, in this organization, you want me to do more, you're going to pay me more. Yeah. And I don't think there's a right or wrong in that. I think it's just different.
Yeah. And I've had a number of conversations in the past couple of weeks with people in the Gen Z and millennial generations who have said that they would rather get paid less and have more of a work-life balance than get paid more and be working, 80 to 100 hours per week. There's just this huge shift in our values potentially, that we see. I think another thing too that's coming up for me is the understanding that having well-being and fulfillment in the rest of your life is actually what allows us to show up as our full selves in work as well. So that can be contributing to it as well.
Yeah, it's a good point. And Mohammed actually just wrote in here, and thank you, Mohammed, by the way, for adding that. And I like that, is that the younger generation has been asking for purpose, growth, and advancement, right? How do we reconcile that with quiet quitting? Yeah, I like that a lot. And I think what comes to mind for me, just off the top of my head here, right, is that we need to think differently about purpose, growth, and advancement. As the corporate structure today is that purpose, growth, and advancement is usually met with a promotion and a pay raise, and those tend to be the only conversations that organizations think that matter. And I think that's the challenge is the organization doing enough research to identify what purpose, growth, and advancement actually means for a younger generation. Because could advancement, it could mean a promotion, but could it maybe mean also more freedom, right? Like you said, more freedom to spend time with your family, and purpose. Does purpose need to be following the corporate mission, or is purpose for an organization to play a larger kind of role with regards to social intelligence, and being contributing to society, and the community, and all of these kind of things, right? And I think there's a bigger conversation around what that actually means, and I'd be really interested to know, which, and I'm sure there are, that the organizations that are having these conversations with the younger generation, what's actually coming out of that, and whether or not actions are being taken to be able to accommodate that, right? Because that's going to require some form of overhaul of your complete HR system, because you're now, the whole, kind of reward system and all of that kind of stuff is going to have to change, and therefore that changes your performance reviews, the performance like measurements, like how do you measure performance based on purpose, and and that kind of stuff. So I think what we're calling quiet quitting really is just nothing more than a shift, right? I think there's a shift that's starting to happen around a bigger conversation around what are the things that the worker of tomorrow, right, is going to value, and how do we need to start transforming our organizations today to meet those needs of people who are working. And I think this is the disruption, right? Is that moment, is like we call in coaching, this is kind of a bit of the breakdown, right, of being able to see that. And some people are going to act on that breakdown. They're going to look at that and go, hey, this is really relevant, we need to do something with this. And there are plenty of people that can say, but we're still making a profit, right? It's like, who cares? Like, let's worry about that 5 years from now, and like every other disruption that we see coming in the horizon, right? We're like, hey, there's a tidal wave coming, and everybody's like, hey, let's run to the hills. And there are always a couple of people that say, yeah, let's pick up some crabs and and shells because it's low tide, yay, right? And so and I think that's what we're starting to see here, and based on that, it, in a way, it's also so timely because if we look at, for example, our book, right, the book that we're writing right now, that is as based on the research that we're doing, we're seeing the shift in the way that organizations need to be working for the future, right? And the typical organizational, vertical organizational structure, or even the flat organizational structures that we're seeing today, are not necessarily going to work with this new generation. And so it's going to be interesting to see how organizations adapt to that, because our proposal, right, is that if society is changing, if the way we work is changing, if generations are changing, then shouldn't we also be looking at how we lead organizations? Shouldn't that also be changing? And what's interesting is there seems to be very little conversation around what we need to do to lead differently, except for today, because today is Gallup's launch of their new book, which is called Blind Spot. And if you haven't gotten Blind Spot, I think it's going to be an instant bestseller. Blind Spot, which investigated 5 million people across 170 countries, on what really matters to them, and it shows you that the way that we've been measuring success from a leadership perspective, not just from organizational leadership, but leadership in general around the world, shows how we've actually been missing the mark because we've been looking strictly at data to measure these elements, right? And I think the leader of the future, not just based on this book, but also our book that will be coming up, and there will be many more books in the future, I'm sure, that are going to be touching on this. Is that if we're not willing, right, to address how we lead organizations, and that needs to be transformed as well, organizations are going to be in trouble, And so, Mohammed came up with another comment. He said, maybe quiet quitting is a spectrum that ranges from complete disengagement to doing what's requested, but setting boundaries. I like that too. Yeah, absolutely, Mohammed. Maybe, um, and I guess it's the evolution of the term, right? And in some ways, I'm not too comfortable with the term quiet quitting, because I don't because it's for me, it's the lack of empathy from the term that gets me, right? It's like quitting, is that there's a negative connotation to the idea of quitting, right? And like that's all on the individual. You're a quitter because you're setting boundaries, and that's one thing that I struggle with that term, right? Quiet quitting, and for me, being able to separate that out and to say, yeah, there might be people that are just simply disengaged. And then there are people who set boundaries, and those are two separate groups. So we're probably going to get different terminology that hopefully we can all respect from this. I think what is a bigger conversation is whether or not organizations benefit from labeling their people as quiet quitters, you're disengaged, whatever that negative connotation is, or do they benefit from, learning from these people and actually having open conversations and saying, because it takes a lot of courage, I think, anyway, right? It takes a lot of courage for a person to say, I'm going to set boundaries. I will tell you that probably 80% of my coaching clients struggle with setting boundaries, some form of boundaries, and their inability to set very clear boundaries for themselves gets them into a lot of trouble, because the world is not clear on kind of like where they're willing to go. And it's those few people who have the courage to speak up and to say, you know what, this is a boundary for me. No, I'm not going to work at 9 o'clock tonight. That's just not going to happen. And no, I'm not going to take on that extra, that third project. And no, I'm not going to, take on the workload of already 2 additional employees while I'm already doing the work of another 2 employees. I'm not going to do that. Those are such important conversations, because that's not a quiet quitter. That's just somebody who knows how to set boundaries. And why is that so relevant for an organization? Because I really believe that feedback is the breakfast of champions. And even feedback that we don't want to hear is highly valuable, right? So if we can have a workforce, right, that's and Mohammed actually just noticed that as well. He says, it takes building trust, right, to have those open conversations. Absolutely. And that's actually what we highlight in the book as well. Is how do you set up an organization where you can have these open conversations? And it's not going to happen in a vertical alignment. It's not going to happen in an organization where you have some form of vertical setting where a person is going to be concerned that when they speak out on their boundaries, right, that they're then going to get a negative performance review, that's going to inhibit them from being able to get their next promotion, right? Because it's all tied in, and we know from it is performance review season for all that matter, and we know that in a lot of these performance reviews, that's feedback that employees often get is like, you're not dedicated enough, and you're not serious enough, and you're not and in that kind of environment where a person is judged, right, based on the boundaries that they set, then that becomes a very, very difficult place for them to have the trust to be able to say no in these kind of situations, right? And I think one of the big challenges that I see in this conversation as well is that the disparity between leadership teams and the people lower in the organization. As a coach, I've had the privilege of coaching people in all levels of the organization, and I will tell you that there is often in the same organization, there is often a separation between what the leadership team thinks is actually happening on the ground and what is actually happening on the ground. And it's actually it really surprises me very often is you'll see people at leadership level who have tremendous emotional intelligence, by the way, who are completely clued in, great, transformational leaders, and they've read every single leadership book that's out there, and they've drank the Kool-Aid, and they're doing all the trainings, and they're applying themselves, and they're all singing Kumbaya, and they're doing all these wonderful things, and they think, hey, listen, we're doing the right stuff, right? And then when you then kind of look how that trickles down through the organization at the ground level, people are stressed out, they're exhausted, they're afraid to speak their minds, they're all of these kind of things, and it's in the same organization. So somewhere in that funnel, that conversation is disappearing. And I think one of the reasons is because we always have to look at the fundamentals of leadership, and a large part of that leadership is what example are leaders setting. And when we look at a lot of these leaders, they're often not really good at setting boundaries themselves, and they're not good at demonstrating that they set boundaries. And it's that lack of demonstration of setting boundaries that trickles down through the organization. And one of the largest IT firms in the world that is known as one of the most progressive or leadership organizations in the world, struggles with the same thing. And I've worked with people on all levels of the organization, and I hear the same thing over and over again, is that the example that is being set from leadership, not what they say, not what they do, but or kind of not do in terms of kind of the leadership practice, but simply an example that they're setting that comes through their enthusiasm. These people are so enthusiastic, and they are so driven that they do work 16 hours a day, right? That they do, that they're up at 11 o'clock at night writing emails, and they're doing all of these kind of things, and it's all out of enthusiasm. They're so excited about what they do, and they have so much energy. But then what happens is when they behave in that certain way, the people under them start looking at that and kind of go, yeah, you might be telling me that it's okay for me to quit work at 6 o'clock, but you're still working at 11. So if I one day want to be that leader, I need to be working at 11 o'clock at night. I need to be able to disregard my own boundaries, right? Because that's the example that you are setting. And I see very, very few leaders actually telling their people to slow down. It happens every once in a while, I have to say, but generally speaking, it doesn't happen. And so as a leader, you can ask yourself that same thing. You can say, "Hey, how am I, encouraging quiet quitting in a way that can help me leverage this organization?" Right, and quiet quitting can be encouraged through, telling, just not just telling people, but showing people, right, that you too are saying no to work, that you too are saying, what, it's okay, to go home early and spend a couple of hours with the kids, for example, and it's okay to do these things, and you can be a human being and you can have a normal life while at the same time having a career, because they can both happen at the same time. People just need to be shown how to do it, right? And so I got a comment here from Dave. So he says there's a distinct difference between an organization that does not respect its employees with long hours, etc., and quiet quitting. It's a Sorry, my eyesight's going. So it's a disruptive term that stifles innovation. I love that. Yeah. So I think what Dave is saying is that, when we label people, right, when we blame people for being a quiet quitter, we actually inhibit their ability to be creative and to be innovative. When in reality, when we actually encourage it, right, when we say, "Listen, I need you to be rested. I need you to be able to say no to this, be able to work, so that you can be at the best cognitive space that you can be, so that you can be a great problem solver, and that you can innovate, and that you can do all these kind of things, because that is what I need from you." Right? Rather than, I need you to be putting in 16 hours a day and trying to prove to me that you're this model employee, whatever that looks like. And let's face it, true leadership is not about doing things the same, right? Nobody needs to be led to do the same thing every single day. Leadership's about doing things differently. Leadership's about bringing up issues. So in a way, people who are quiet quitters, they're the leaders. They're people taking charge. They're saying, "Hey, you know what? Enough is enough." And what organization doesn't want somebody to be able to step up as a leader? Or are we just encouraging followers, right? Is that what we want out of an organization? Is we just want you to be a follower? So instead of looking at quiet quitting from that negative perspective, and by the way, thank you so much, Dave, for it's been a while since we chatted. So thanks so much for bringing that up. It's the whole concept right here is that we can leverage on quiet quitters, because they essentially, by setting boundaries, they are potentially leaders in a movement that we can leverage on. Because when we as an organization actually encourage our people to slow down, we speed up. We know these things. We know this from when we train athletes and all of these kind of people, is that it's not about consistent output. We might think it is, but it isn't. It's about a flow of energy, and that flow of energy can't be consistent throughout an organization. And even though we want to measure it that way, and it gives us a sense of confidence, and we can please our board of directors, et cetera, but when we actually encourage people to go with their flow of energy, we know that people perform better. They don't perform worse. They just perform differently. It's not a consistent straight line. And I think that's the challenge with data. Whenever we are looking at data, we want to see this straight uptick. We want to see this straight line moving up, kind of saying, "Hey, look, there is growth." But we're afraid to see kind of downward dips as a form of motivation, and to say, "Hey, there's something here that we can learn from, and that we can grow from, and that we can utilize to leverage that next uptick." Because what goes up has to come down. And so that the same thing happens with the amount of energy that we're putting into our work. And so what matters is that we have energy, that employees have energy to apply themselves at times where it matters. right? And a great conversation. Was it by John McEnroe, who once said, he says, in tennis, not every point matters. He says what matters is that you score the points that matter. And that's where the energy goes in, and that's how you play a 5-hour match. And I was thinking about that and said, that is so smart. It's like from a strategy perspective, you want to play those plays that matter, the ones that are going to get you to that winning spot quicker, right? And in many ways, running an organization is the same thing. Is you want those spurts of energy to be at moments that matter, not every single day the same amount of energy, that gives you a sense of confidence that the organization has grown, because your people are just going to perform at a potential, at a percentage of their potential that is way below the mark. And that's why so many organizations struggle then with head count, with the whole not just quiet quitting, but the great resignation. All of these kind of things have to do with that energy. Is how are you leveraging on this energy? And I believe that quiet quitting is just a sign that people are saying, listen, give me this space to be excellent. Give me the space to be the best that I can be, because if I have that space, I will outperform any form of expectations or whatever it is that the organization has. And why? Because I am amazing, because I am incredible. And every single person in your organization is that person. Every single person that you've hired into your organization is amazing, because otherwise you wouldn't have hired them. And the only difference is how are you leveraging on that energy? How are you leveraging on them? And I think that we are at the cusp. I think that what this is today is a sign that things are changing, that there is going to be a shift in the next 5 years, maybe 10 years, but there's going to be a shift in terms of how organizations are run. I can see that just based on the hundreds and hundreds of conversations that I have had with leaders. And that's, to me, is going to be really exciting, because that change is going to create much leaner organizations, much more streamlined organizations, but organizations that work with the flow of energy, right? By being more dynamic in how they run their operations and leading their teams, and all of these kind of things. And of course, what that's going to look like, watch out for our book, because that's going to be the topic of our book, in terms of like how you could structure that, having a future-proof organization in a way that's going to set you up for, not just the next 5-10 years, but maybe the next 100 years. And I really believe that this is going to be a big thing. So to me, quiet quitting, is potentially a good thing, permitting that you are willing to leverage on that, and to think about that, and to look at your own leadership structure and kind of say, hey, what are we missing? Right? And that's the blind spot, right? What are we missing? And so if you haven't got it yet, get Gallup's book, right? The Blind Spot. And then our book is going to come next, which is going to fit beautifully into that. Yeah. And of course, my book, Five Energies of Horrible Bosses, also talks about that energy that we are not measuring, and why we are missing that. So if that's an interest to you, focus on that for a bit. I think there's going to be a lot there in the near future.
Yeah, I think there's been a lot of great points brought up today. And I apologize for the lighting in here. The sun went down, and I lost my light source there.
No,
I didn't want to get up and run over to my corner and turn on.
It's awesome. No worries at all.
But I see, as we're closing up here, I think the main takeaways and main points to remember is that quiet quitting can be leveraged on, as you said, and as a number of people have commented today too. And thank you for everyone who left comments. We really appreciate you guys taking the time to interact, and it allows us to know that we're adding value to you in your life as well, to know that we're talking about something that is of importance to you. And I think that the important distinction here, I think there are two things to point out. Is one, the difference, as Dave mentioned, between an organization that doesn't respect its employees and the idea of quiet quitting, and to separate those two and understand that there needs to be this mutual trust, as Mohammed mentioned. And in order to have that trust, we need to be able to talk to each other and have conversations around what is expected, and to define what level of work is satisfactory for both parties, both in the upper levels and in the lower levels, and to come to an agreement that allows everyone to kind of work to their power and to work with what works for them ultimately.
Yeah, no, I agree, and that's something that we're going to be bringing up in the book too, right? Is kind of the leadership style of the future is therefore is going to need to change, and it is going to become more of a conversation, rather than something directive or visionary or whatever it is that we like to call it these days. It's going to be more conversational, and so for leaders to be able to have that conversation, and not just leaders, actually every single person in the organization is going to have to be able to learn how to have that conversation, and not just that conversation, conversations in general, right? About things that matter, and how to structure those conversations, and how we can leverage on each other through having the right type of conversations in the right type of way. And so what our book is going to do, it's going to propose a model in which you can frame those conversations, and in a way where we can set everybody up to be both a leader and a follower, and that is what I believe is going to be the organization of the future. Is that you're not going to have a singular leader, you're not going to have that leadership team versus everybody else. Everybody at time is going to be a leader, and everybody at times is going to be a follower. And that is going to be a mutually agreed upon process for every single employee in the organization, from the CEO down to the janitor, right? Is that everybody knows that they can step up to be a leader, but they can also step up to be a follower. And there are times where the CEO is going to be following the janitor, and there are times when the janitor is going to be following the CEO, and vice versa, and everything in between. And that is going to be a completely different way. And that's how the organization of the future is going to be able to prevent these type of disruptions and changes, and whatever changes might come in, generational changes and mindsets and all of that kind of stuff. So for some reason my camera is having difficulty tracking me today, so so I'm going a little bit blur here. So I'm going to wait 1 second. 3, 2, 1, come on. You got me. I'm going to go a little closer. Yay, come on. No, he's like, dude, like, you're moving around way too much. I'm going to stop seeing you as, so I'm actually just going to, there we go. All right, there I am. Just needed to reset the camera. Yeah. So that's kind of, all from me. How about you, Kilani? Is that, your closing statement was awesome. Is that, anything else to bring, or is that it?
Nope, that's all for me.
Beautiful. Well, in that case, I want to thank everybody for joining us today. Thank you so much to we had Mohammed who came in, and I have to say there is also Taranjeet who came in, who just kind of did a quick mention, and he says, great discussion. I agree. And join us, of course, in the future for multiple conversations. Dave, of course, thank you again for coming online and having this conversation with us. It's so important. And of course, Kilani, thank you as well. And then it's time for us to log off and get back to life.
Thank you, everyone.
All right. Bye, everybody. See ya.
Bye.